So not only are there several Chiefs players with jobs on the line, but one player on the team is a huge question mark due to health concerns that has me wondering what the team will end up doing with him. So I've got to talk about that along with the players facing the most pressure to perform in these preseason games as I take another shot at an up-to-date 53-man roster projection. But first, how about those? All right, last week was my third edition of a stab at the Chiefs 53-man roster projection. So what I want to do is quickly move on to a fourth roster projection along with my reasons for the slight changes, and then look at players that must perform if they want to earn their way or keep their spot on the 53-man roster, because enough has changed since last week. We had a preseason game, we had another week of practice, and there's definitely some things worth looking at here. Still going to roll with two quarterbacks, though, Mahomes, then Wentz. There's no debate. There's no players in this position group with the most pressure to perform. I still think Chris Oladokun ends up on the practice squad. Then you've got Mahomes and Wentz as 1 and 2. Now, I did see some chatter where fans were more impressed with Chris Oladokun's performance than Wentz, saying Chris O should be the backup rather than Carson. But that's the same conversation that was had last year with Shane Buechele over Blaine Gabbert, yet the Chiefs have shown they are going to roll with the veteran pretty much every single time. And I think Wentz is honestly an upgrade over Gabbert. Then when you consider the fact that much of Carson's snaps last week was the Chiefs' backups on offense against the Jags' first-team defense, it makes a bit more sense why it looked a little rough out there. In tomorrow's matchup against Detroit, I think Wentz may at least get a series or two with the majority of the starters, so I'm more curious to see how he looks during that. Next up is the running back room, and while I'm not going to make any changes from last week's video, and I'm still rolling with the same four guys, Pacheco, CEH, Carson Steele, and Deneric Prince, the room has a couple of question marks for me at the moment. For starters, I added Carson Steele to the 53-man roster before he balled out in the preseason game because I'm not sure KC can safely rely on Clyde all season long due to his health issues. And now that a week's gone by, CEH ended up missing all 4 days of training camp practices, which makes me even less confident of that fact. And that's why even though Steele surpassed Deneric Prince for the time being in the rotation over the last week of training camp practices, I'm not really sure how Prince doesn't also make the roster because of Clyde's potential reliability issues. I mean, maybe the Chiefs could even move on from CEH, but I'm not ready to go there at this point in time. He's battling through mental health issues with the PTSD flare-ups, as well as that cyclic vomiting syndrome that hospitalizes him and forces him to get IVs while he goes through these spells. And this is a business at the end of the day, yes. I'm still not sure, though, that the Chiefs would let go of CEH. It wouldn't be the best optics at this point in time. But I guess I want to ask you guys the question, with CEH's sickness, flare-ups, and everything going on causing reliability issues with him this early on, what do you think the Chiefs end up doing with him? Maybe they release him with some sort of an injury settlement, or do you think they move him over to the NFI list like BJ Thompson, or maybe straight up release him? He doesn't cost much at the end of the day from a contract standpoint, but he does take up a roster spot, and that's why I'd love to hear if you personally think CEH is in danger of being cut from the roster. With that being said, though, I still think Deneric Prince is the guy in the room facing the most pressure to perform here, and my reasoning for that is if Prince struggles in his last 2 preseason games, kind of like he did last year, he was one of the favorites to make the roster, then sort of fizzled out in the preseason games, he could find himself back on the practice squad with the coaching staff most likely looking for either a free agent veteran or eyeing other teams and who they have as running backs on cut-down day. And that does leave LRZ once again off this list. I'm still not fully sure what to do with the guy. He could ball out in these last 2 preseason games, but for now, I still think he would be a great addition to the practice squad to marinate, to slow cook for a year and grow in his overall knowledge of the sport of football and keep soaking up the Chiefs' schemes, playbooks, all that good stuff. He doesn't bring much value on offense right now, so if he does in fact make the roster, it's going to have to be one of the Dave Tobe specials, where he makes his case to have him there as maybe a returner and a backup kicker to Butker. To add LRZ to the 53 right now would mean a fifth running back, I guess, at the moment, because I'm not going to take Carson Steele off, and I just can't bring myself to do it. Next up is the wide receiver room, and I'm going to make a change this go around from 6 receivers on the roster to 7. I've actually had 6 receivers making the final 53 all offseason long, but I do think Hollywood Brown's injury changes things a bit here, potentially. He won't be out long enough to justify placing him on IR for the first 4 games of the season. At least I don't think so. So I would assume KC opts to have another receiver around and available in the meantime. So for this go-round, I'm rolling with the same 6 receivers as last week in Hollywood Brown, Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, Justin Watson, Mecole Hardman, and Sky Moore. But I'm also going to now add in Justin Ross as number 7. He's been rising this past week, making catch after catch, and on his 2 targets in last week's preseason game, he not only came down with both of them, but arguably made the catch of the game on that sideline 50-50 ball. It was really impressive. And his stat sheet, yes, at the end of the day, only showed 1 actual catch because his second reception was negated due to a penalty. But I still think it was a great rep for him on a scramble drill, and his stock is up. I also think Mecole Hardman's spot became even more safe after Hollywood's injury because due to Hardman's speed and the way you can use him in the offense, he can fill in some similar roles as Hollywood. Though again, he's not Hollywood Brown, okay? But with Hollywood out, Worthy now doesn't seem like a candidate to return punts, with him being needed even more in the offense. So Mecole could also fill in that role as the returner, and that does leave, right now, Kadarius Toney and Nico Remigio as the guys with the most pressure to perform in tomorrow's game. I mean, you could put Ross on this list as well, because he could have a couple of bad preseason games while Nico balls out. Maybe Toney balls out, and I think those are the 3 that we're going to be watching right now at this point in time. Kadarius Toney, Nico Remigio, and Justin Ross. Toney has struggled to stay healthy during camp, and even though he returned this past week, he worked in almost exclusively with the 3rd-team offense in the last padded practice and is also listed as like wide receiver 8 on the team's unofficial depth chart. He's far from safe here, but a couple of standout preseason games could very well help his case. Then if we look at Nico, he's another guy facing a lot of pressure here because his performance last week was a bit of a mixed bag. He had a muffed punt that went out of bounds, thankfully, and then caught a pass that was stripped for a scoop and score, yet that somehow got overturned, so he got a bit lucky there. So he's right on the bubble for me, and if Nico wishes to overtake Justin Ross's spot as wide receiver 7, he's really got to stand out over the next couple of weeks in order to make it. Then, in order to make room for a 7th receiver, I'm going to remove 1 offensive lineman, even though I am struggling to do that because not only is Wanye Morris a bit banged up with that bruised knee, but so is Jawan Taylor now with a bit of a shoulder tweak. Then when you combine that with the fact that Joe Thuney is still currently being ramped up, that's now 3 players along the O-line working through things at the moment. However, in spite of that, I'm going to roll with 9 offensive linemen for now instead of 10. I still have the 5 starters in left tackle Kingsley Suamataia, left guard Joe Thuney, who should in theory be ready to go by the start of the season. Then I have center Creed Humphrey, right guard Trey Smith, and right tackle Jawan Taylor. But with 2 tackles right now working through injuries, Jawan Taylor and Wanye Morris, I still think that leaves Hunter Norzad and Lucas Niang pretty safe. Norzad has played right tackle as well as all along the interior. Then Mike Caliendo has also been working in as the next man up at the left guard spot if Joe Thuney hasn't been out there. So I'm going to leave Caliendo on there as pretty safe, which then makes for the difficult decision to actually move on from CJ Hansen, the Chiefs' 7th round draft pick. The hope here is if that does happen, he is able to clear waivers and end up on the practice squad. However, if the Chiefs aren't confident he will clear waivers and they are high enough on the guy, I think the only other option here is to still roll with 6 receivers or maybe roll with 3 total running backs instead of 4 to make room for 10 offensive linemen. Maybe they think Deneric Prince has a better chance of clearing waivers, for example, than Hansen if Prince doesn't ball out, and they opt to go that route for a bit or make the tough decision to move on from CEH. But for now, I'm saying CJ Hansen does get cut, but makes it safely onto the practice squad. That does also leave CJ Hansen as my player along the line with the most pressure to perform here in these last 2 preseason games. If he balls out enough, maybe he's able to lock in a spot on the 53 over another lineman or make the coaching staff's decision easy to cut someone else from a different position group. Next up for tight ends, I'm not going to change anything here. I had KC rolling with Travis Kelce, Noah Gray, and Jared Wiley, with Irv Smith Jr. being the odd man out to make room for the addition of a 4th running back or a fullback in Carson Steele. So I still have Smith off of the list, That's also why he's on the other list as a player with the most pressure to perform. He's got to really stand out in these preseason games if he really wants to justify a fourth tight end on the roster. There is a world out there where I think the coaching staff would like that idea of 4 tight ends as they attempt to preserve some of Kelsey's overall snaps. He's not getting any younger after all, but as of right now, I think Irv Smith Jr. really has to earn it, and maybe he finds himself on the practice squad, worst case scenario. So that makes 25 on offense, and for the defense, I'll keep it at 25 as well, so we're going to get to that. But before I do, with the NFL preseason officially here, that means the regular season is literally right around the corner. I will definitely be going to a Chiefs home game this year, probably against either the Raiders or the Broncos, because easy dubs. And whichever game I end up going to, I'll definitely be using today's sponsor, SeatGeek, to get my tickets. In fact, I've got a special hookup for you guys from SeatGeek. Everyone can use my code HBTC10 and get 10% off any tickets on there, whether you're a new customer or not. This also applies to other sports games like the Royals, Kansas City Current, concerts, festivals, you name it. Code HBTC10 is gonna get it done. Each ticket is rated on a scale of 1 to 10, so you know if you are getting a good deal. So look for the green dots. Green means good, red means bad. So hey, take out your phone, open the SeatGeek app, and add code HBTC10 to your account ASAP, because this offer is only available for a limited time. Lastly, it doesn't matter how many times you've bought tickets using SeatGeek before, because code HBTC10 is going to get you 10% off your next order regardless. All right, let's get into the defense. For defensive tackles, I'm not going to make any changes here. I'm still rolling with 5, with those being Chris Jones, Turk Wharton, Derek Nottie, Neil Farrell Jr., and Mike Pennell. I added Mike Pennell as DT number 5 last week because he's been having a great camp. That makes for 2 defensive tackles that aren't on this list having the most pressure to perform if they want to maybe edge out somebody like Pennell or maybe even Neil Farrell Jr. And those players to me right now are Matt Dickerson and Fabian Lovett Sr. Dickerson was on the roster for a good piece of last season, so he does have that experience going for him. He also had a nice play in last week's preseason matchup when he batted down a ball, I believe on 3rd down, so nice rep there. And honestly, you could make a case for him being on the 53 right now, and maybe some already have, but he's on the list of most pressure to perform at this point in time for me. Then for Fabian, he's a talented UDFA out of Florida State, and Joe Cullen recently spoke pretty highly of the guy. I think the Chiefs, though, could sneak him onto the practice squad for this season, calling him up if needs be for depth purposes if injuries hit the room. Then for defensive ends, I'm still keeping 5 on here, but I think they should maybe consider adding a veteran to this room or something, because outside of George Karlaftis, Mike Dana, and FAU, with FAU still having his own question marks at this point in time, that leaves Truman Jones and Malik Herring. And those aren't the strongest players to have in the rotation. I think Malik Herring, though, has shown flashes and is probably safer to make the 53 than Truman Jones. So I'm going to list Truman Jones with the most pressure to perform if he wants to snag a spot on the 53-man roster. He could very well be a practice squad guy this year. Then again, Charles Omenihu will eventually return, probably after the bye week, but will definitely start the season out on the PUP list. And with that being said, if Omenihu is healthy, I'm not sure I'd be advocating for a veteran addition to the defensive end room, but since he isn't fully ready to go at this point in time, if the Chiefs opted to add a veteran here or someone else from another team's 90-man roster on cutdown day, I would not be surprised and would probably even welcome it. Next up is the linebacker room. I have them rolling with 5 like last week, down from 6 in my first 2 projections, with those being Nick Bolton, Drew Tranquill, Leo Chanel, Jack Cochran, and the UDFA Curtis Jacobs. Jack Cochran is the team's backup Mike linebacker and played lots of special teams last year, so pretty safe to me. Then the UDFA Curtis Jacobs has been having a solid camp so far, but I guess you could put him on the list alongside Cam Jones as the 2 in the linebacker room with the most pressure to perform. If Cam Jones, for example, has a bunch of positive flashes in the 2 remaining preseason games, maybe he surpasses Jacobs on the pecking order in order to make the 53. But for now, I'm going to roll with Curtis Jacobs. Next up is cornerbacks, an ever so interesting group to watch as several players are fighting for that cornerback 2 spot. I'm not going to have any changes here for now, as I'm still rolling with 6 guys, and them being Trent McDuffie, Jalen Watson, Joshua Williams, Najee Johnson, Nick Jones, and Kamal Hadden. Hadden is on there right now because of his rookie contract and him probably just playing a lot of special teams right now. But Kelvin Joseph, I believe, is back and healthy, so we should see him playing in these preseason games. And if Kelvin continues looking like he did at camp pre-hamstring injury, he was working in with the first team defense and kind of balling out. If he plays like that in these preseason games, I think he has a legitimate shot at pushing Kamal Hadden out, rookie contract locked in for him or not. Therefore, I have both Kamal Hadden and Kelvin Joseph having the most pressure on them to perform in these preseason games. Then for the safety room, not going to have any changes here either. I'm keeping 4 on the 53, with those being Justin Reed, Brian Cook, Chamari Connor, and Jaden Hicks. Hicks is not going anywhere. He looked incredible last preseason game, and while he may primarily play special teams this season, he will see the field at times on defense, with defensive backs coach Dave Merritt saying he could find himself in a similar role back there to Mike Edwards last year, who is now gone. Justin Reed is working back from his quad injury and should be good to go to start against the Ravens in the season opener. So for now, I'm keeping Dion Bush as the team's practice squad addition, and maybe having him called up for the first couple weeks of the regular season in case Justin Reed isn't quite ready to go. And honestly, this is one of the rare position groups on the roster where I don't have a player facing the most pressure to perform. I think the 4 safeties are solid locks, with Dion Bush being the clear next man up in the pecking order. However, maybe we can throw Tyree Gillespie on this list as the guy who could land on the practice squad to be the next man available in case of emergency. So he's got to ball out in these last 2 preseason games, so I can have somebody in the safety room on this list. Then for specialists, no changes here and no pressure to perform or risk them not making the roster. Long snapper James Winchester, punter Matt Ariza, and the highest paid kicker in the NFL, let's freaking go, Harrison Butker, are all very safe here. I just hope Ariza keeps quickly building that rapport with Butker as a placeholder, since he didn't do that in college, but so far, he's looked great out there with Butker on field goals. And with that, let me know your thoughts on this most updated 53-man roster based on injuries, last preseason game, and the final week of training camp. And then also let me know about the players I have listed with the most pressure to perform. Do you agree or disagree, and why? And until next time, let's go. Let's freaking go. How about those?